Hi everyone, welcome to a third and honestly belated episode of my corset series. I've already tackled a 1950s Merry Widow corset and a 19th century Pretty Housemaid one. So today I wanted to go back in time a little bit more. For this third episode I really wanted to make 18th century stays. So technically this is now a corset and stays series, not just a corset series, but let's keep the name corset series. It actually took quite some time to find the pattern. I didn't want to make it too difficult for myself because I'm still pretty new to corsetry. So I went with the Simplicity 8162 pattern. I know this is not the most historically accurate one, but it is made in collaboration with American Duchess, so I trust it a little bit more than any other random pattern. Now on the American Duchess website there is some information on how to make it more historically accurate, so I did take some inspiration from that. Let's start with the fabric that I chose. I wanted to stick to the kind of blue color scheme that I already have going on, so I tried to find something that has blue in it, but I didn't want it to be completely blue. So I ended up with this fabric. There are trees all over this in different color leaves, so there is blue in it, but there are also other colors in there, and I was really drawn to this. It's a twill fabric, so it should be nice and sturdy, which is great for corsetry. And I decided to use this fabric for both the outer layer and the lining layer. And then for the interlining I used some leftover linen fabric for my chemise. So I was really happy I could take it out of my stash and do something with it. The first thing I did was make a mock-up. For this I just used some old sheets. I kept it pretty simple. I only needed to know if I picked the right size and if I liked the general fit. So I cut all the pieces out twice, technically 4 times, an outer layer and a lining layer, and then I made the mock-up and I also inserted the boning. I then tried it on, and you may be able to see here that I added extra boning channels because that's one of the tips on the American Duchess website, is to add more boning to it to give it a bit more structure and make it more historical. So on one half of the stays I added the extra channels, and I really liked how it looked, so I then transferred those boning channels onto the actual pattern so that I could use it for the real thing. The size was pretty good, but it did feel like it was a little bit short, and I know these stays are not supposed to be super long, but it didn't really hit my waist, so I decided to add an extra inch of length, and for that I also used the American Duchess website to figure out exactly where to lengthen it. So once I was happy with the mock-up, it was time to start working on the real thing. So I got my fabric and I folded it in half, and then I started to lay the pattern pieces on the fabric. I didn't fully pattern match because that would just be impossible with all these straight and diagonal lines. So I decided to at least kind of match up the center front pieces and the center back pieces so that when you wear it, it kind of matches up. So I just found the print that I liked, the part of the print that I liked the most, and that's where I decided to place the front and back pieces, center front and center back pieces. So once I had drawn one, I just found the matching part of the print somewhere else in the fabric, and then I drew it on there, making sure that I kept in mind the 1.5 centimeter seam allowance so that it would match up correctly when it was sewn, not when it's cut out, if that makes sense. Once I had placed and drawn those pieces, I placed the other pieces as well. And for those, I did want to kind of match up left and right side. So I just found the same pattern, different places of the fabric to cut it out in a way that it would at least kind of look cohesive. So once I was done placing and drawing all the pattern pieces, I cut everything out. I then took the pieces I cut out and I transferred all the markings and all the boning channels onto the fabric. And I used brightly colored chalk, which I thought would be a good idea, but I would come to regret later on. In the meantime, I had also cut out all the interlining pieces. And to prevent anything moving while I was sewing the boning channels, I decided to baste the outer layer and the interlining layers together using some really big basting stitches. Then it was time to actually start sewing, the exciting part, at least for me. And the first thing I had to do was sew all the boning channels. I used a thread that was a matching color to the background of the print, of the fabric. So kind of a cream ivory kind of color. It did take forever, but I kind of enjoyed it. I listened to a podcast and just sewed and sewed and sewed. Once the boning channels were done, it was time to put everything together. So I pinned all the seams and I made sure to match up all the notches, and then I just sewed it all together. And then I repeated the same process for the lining layers. Once I was done with the sewing, I pressed all the seams open to make it look really nice and crisp. Next, I had to work on the shoulder straps. So I pinned the outer layer and the lining layer together, wrong sides together, and then sewed along the outer edge. And once that was done, I sewed it into place on the actual back piece. And I made sure to only sew it onto the outer layer of the fabric and not the interlining, because if I had done that, I would not be able to put the boning in later. So I made sure to keep an opening there. Then it was time to attach the lining to the rest of the stage. So I pinned everything together right sides together and sewed the side seams together, so the outer edges, making sure to keep the top and bottom open. Then once that was done, I turned everything right side out and then I cut along the marked cutting lines on the flaps. Then it was time for a step I like in theory, but I don't necessarily like doing it. It's adding the boning. I love it because it adds so much shape to it, but it's pretty tedious. But it needs to be done. So I first removed the basting stitches. Then I took out all of the boning I used in my mock-up and tried to match some of those up with the boning channels on the real thing. Now I couldn't use them in the exact same place as I had done on the mock-up because the real thing is an inch longer, so I had to do some puzzling. Then I just cut out some more boning for all the boning channels that were left. Once the boning was done, I started to work on the binding. For this I got some dark blue bias binding, which matches really nicely with one of the blue colors in the pattern, in the print. And to do the binding, I just took the binding, folded it in half and placed it kind of over the edges, the top and bottom edges, to catch the raw seams. And then pin it into place and just hand sewed it all down. And then it was time for the eyelets. Now the pattern called for just metal grommets, but since they were not really invented yet in the 18th century, I decided to make it a little bit more historically accurate and hand sew all the eyelets. And to do that, I first marked the right placement, and the placement in a pattern is for cross lacing, but I wanted to do spiral lacing because that was way more common in the 18th century. So I kind of had to change the placement. Because for cross lacing you have the eyelets at the exact same height every single time, but for spiral lacing they need to be offset a little bit. And then I got to work on actually sewing the eyelets. First I poked a teeny tiny hole with my smallest tapestry needle. Then I went to a bigger needle and then another bigger needle, and then I moved on to knitting needles. So I got 5 different size knitting needles and I kept making the hole bigger until it was big enough and I was happy with it. This was a bit of a tiresome process because there are 60 eyelets, but I don't have an all, so this is the next best thing. Then I got some thread that's actually the exact same color as the thread I use for the boning channels, but it's just the super strong version, so it's a little bit thicker and yeah, just really strong. And I feel like I needed something strong for the eyelets. And then I first secured the thread on the inside, then I pulled the needle through to the front. Then I sewed around the eyelet in a cross pattern, and this just helps keep it open while you work around the eyelet. So once I done the cross pattern, I stitched 3 stitches in each quarter, so in between each stitch from the cross pattern. And once that was done, I secured the thread on the inside again to finish the eyelet. And then I did that a total of 60 times. Now finally it was time for the lacing. I had some pretty dark blue ribbon and decided to use that because it matches the binding and it matches the blue tones in the print as well. So I first threaded the ribbing through a tapestry needle and pulled that through the very first eyelet at the bottom. And then I pinned the bottom edge of the ribbon into place on the inside of the stays to secure it, whilst I was lacing my way all the way up to the top. Then once I was done lacing everything, I got back to the bottom edge and I sewed the edge of the ribbon into place. I then repeated that same process for the other lacing, so the front lacing, and I also used this ribbon to tie the shoulder strap to the front. Which means that now they are done. My stays are done. I think already just holding it up like this, I think it looks great. I like the pattern, and as you can see, let's use the back as an example. It is pattern matched somewhat nicely. Now remember how I was talking about the chalk that I used to mark the boning channels? It's still on here. I tried to remove it, but it didn't really work completely. So I got most of it out, but there's still a really faint line of chalk. So there's little lines of pink and purple all over it, which is fine because there's pink and purple in the print as well, so I don't mind it too much. And this is the inside, looking really nice as well. So yeah, it's done. So let's try it on, see what it looks like when I'm wearing it. And these are the finished stays. I'm happy with how they turned out. I love the design of it. I love the print of the fabric. I love the dark blue details of the bias binding and the lacing. And I like how it fits. I'm so glad I made it an inch longer because this is where my natural waist hits. So that's perfect. And yeah, it's also quite comfortable actually. I really like it. I definitely feel like as I keep doing this series, I'm improving. Because I think this has been the best so far. I love my Pretty Housemaid one, but this is even nicer. I think the finishing is great and just the boning channels are good, pretty good, if I do say so myself. So I'm happy with this. Now I need to go and think about what episode 4 is going to be, what I will be making next. But for now, I'm going to end this here. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a great day and I will see you in the next one. Bye.